Tad Ashma Saram Hridayam Bhatedam Yad Grihyamaner Harinam Deyahi Na Vikriyetata Yada Vikaro Netre Jalam Gatra Ruheshu Harshaha Tadashmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgriyamanir Harinamadeyahi Navikriyetat Yadavikaro Netre Jalam Gatra Ruheshu Harsha Tadashmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgriyamanir Harinamadeyahi Navikriyetat Yadavikaro Netre Jalam Gata Ruheshu Harsha Tadashmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgriyamanir Harinamadeyahi Navikriyetat Yadavikaro Netre Jalam Gata Ruheshu Harsha
Yasmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam Agriyamanir Harinamadeyahi The Creator Yadavikaro Netre Jalam Gatra Ruheshu Harshaha
Tadashmasharang Hridayam Bhatedam Yakriyam Manarharinam Deyayi Navikriyetata Yadavikaro Netre Jalangatra Ruheshu Harshaha
Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgriyamanir Harinamadeyahi
Yadgriyamanir Harinamadeyahi
Navikriyetat Yadavikaro
Navikriyetat Yadavikaro
Netre Jalagatra Shuharsha
Netre Jalam Gata Ruheshu Harsha
Tadashmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam
Tadashmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam
Yadgriyamanir Harinamadeyahi
Yamanir
Navikriyetat Yadavikaro Netre Jalam Gata Ruheshu Harshaha
Tadashmasaram Hridayam Bhatedam Yadgrihyamanar Harinamadeyahi Avikriyeta yada vikaro Netre janangatra harsha
Rashmasaram hridayam batheram Yadrihamana harinamadeya Priyetata yada vikaro Nitre jalam gacharuheshu harshaha Tadashmasaram hridayam patedam Rashmasaram hridayam patedam Yad kriya manir harinama teyahi Yagriyamanir harinama deyahi Navrikiyetata yada vikaro Vikaro Netre jalam gatra Ruhesu harasha Ete jalam gatareshu harsha. Word for word, tut. That. Ashmasaram is steel framed. Hridayam, heart. Bata idam, certainly that. Yet, which, griyamanahi, in spite of chanting, Harinam, the holy name of the Lord, Deyahi, by concentration of the mind, Na, does not, Vikriyeta, change, Ata, thus, Yada, when, Vikaraha, reaction, Netre, in the eyes, Jalam, tears, Gataruheshu, at the pores, Harshaha, eruptions of ecstasy. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Certainly that heart is still framed, which, in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord, with concentration does not change when ecstasy takes place, tears fill the eyes, and the hairs stand on end. Purport. We should note with profit that in the first 3 chapters of the 2nd canto, a gradual process of development of devotional service is being presented. In the first chapter, the first step is in devotional service for God consciousness by the process of hearing and chanting has been stressed, and a gross conception of the personality of Godhead in his universal form for the beginners is recommended. By such a gross conception of God through the material manifestations of his energy, one is enabled to spiritualize the mind and the senses and gradually concentrate the mind upon Lord Vishnu, the Supreme, who is present as the Supersoul in every heart and everywhere, in every atom of the material universe. The system of Pancha Upasana, recommending 5 mental attitudes for the common man, is also enacted for this purpose, namely, gradual development, worship of the superior that may be in the form of fire, electricity, the sun, the massive living beings, Lord Shiva, and at last, the impersonal Supersoul, the partial representation of Lord Vishnu. They are all nicely described in the 2nd chapter, but in the 3rd chapter, further development is prescribed after one has actually reached the stage of Vishnu worship or pure devotional service. And the mature stage of Vishnu worship is suggested herein in relation to the change of heart. The whole process of spiritual culture is aimed at changing the heart of the living being in the matter of his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord as subordinate servant, which is his eternal constitutional position. So with the progress of devotional service, the reaction of change in the heart is exhibited by gradual detachment from the sense of material enjoyment, by a false sense of lording it over the world, and an increase in the attitude of rendering loving service to the Lord. Vaidhi Bhakti, or regulated devotional service by the limbs of the body, namely the ears, the eyes, the nose, hands, and legs, as already explained here and before, is now stressed herein in relation to the mind, which is the impetus for all activities of the limbs of the body. It is expected by all means that by discharging regulated devotional service, one must manifest the change of heart. If there is no such change, the heart must be considered steel-framed, for it is not melted even when there is chanting of the holy name of the Lord. We must always remember that hearing and chanting are the basic principles of discharging devotional duties. And if they are properly performed, there will follow the reactional ecstasy and the signs of tears in the eyes and standing of the hairs on the body. These are natural consequences and are the preliminary symptoms of the bhava stage, which occurs before one reaches the perfectional stage of prema, love of Godhead. If the reaction does not take place, even after continuous hearing and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, it may be considered to be due to offenses only. That is the opinion of the Sandarbha. In the beginning of chanting of the holy name of the Lord, if the devotee has not yet been very careful about evading the 10 kinds of offenses at the feet of the holy name, certainly the reaction of feelings of separation will not be visible by tears in the eyes and standing of the hair on end. The bhava stage is manifested by 8 transcendental symptoms, namely inertness, perspiration, standing of hairs on end, failing in the voice, trembling, paleness of the body, tears in the eyes, and finally, trance. The Nectar Devotion, a summary study of Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, explains those symptoms and vividly describes other transcendental developments, both in steady and accelerating manifestations. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has very critically discussed all these bhava displays in connection with some unscrupulous neophytes imitating the above symptoms for cheap appreciation. Not only Vishwanath Chakravarti, but also Srila Rupa Goswami treated them very critically. Sometimes all the above 8 symptoms of ecstasy are imitated by the mundane devotees, Prakrita Sahajas. But the pseudo-symptoms are at once detected when one sees the pseudo-devotee addicted to so many forbidden things. Even though decorated with the signs of a devotee, a person addicted to smoking, drinking, or illegitimate sex with women cannot have all the above-mentioned ecstatic symptoms. But it is seen that sometimes these symptoms are willfully initiated, and for this reason, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti accuses the imitators of being stone-hearted. They are sometimes even affected by the reflection of such transcendental symptoms, yet if they still do not give up the forbidden habits, then they are hopeless cases for transcendental realization. When Lord Chaitanya met Srila Ramananda Roy of Kavar on the bank of the Godavari, the Lord developed all these symptoms, but because of the presence of some non-devotee brahmanas who were attendants of the Raya, the Lord suppressed these symptoms. So sometimes they are not visible even in the body of the first-class devotee for certain circumstantial reasons. Therefore, real steady bhava is definitely displayed in the matter of cessation of material desires, kshanti. Utilization of every moment in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Avyartha kalatvam. Eagerness for glorifying the Lord constantly. Nama gane sada ruchi. Attraction for living in the land of the Lord. Pritis tad vasati stale. Complete detachment from material happiness. Vikrati, virakti, and pridelessness. Mana shunyata. One who has developed all these transcendental qualities is really possessed of the bhava stage, as distinguished from the stone-hearted imitator or mundane devotee. The whole process can be summarized as follows. The advanced devotee who chants the holy name of the Lord in a perfectly offenseless manner and is friendly to everyone can actually relish the transcendental taste of glorifying the Lord. And the result of such realization is reflected in the cessation of all material desires, as mentioned above. The neophytes, due to their being in the lower stage of devotional service, are invariably envious, so much so that they invent their own ways and means of devotional regulations without following the acharyas. As such, even if they make a show of constantly chanting the holy name of the Lord, they cannot relish the transcendental taste of the holy name. Therefore, the show of tears in the eyes, trembling, perspiration, or unconscious, etc., is condemned. They can, however, get in touch with a pure devotee of the Lord and rectify their bad habits. Otherwise, they shall continue to be stone-hearted and unfit for any treatment. A complete progressive march on the return path home back to Godhead will depend on the instructions of the revealed scriptures directed by a realized devotee. Om Gyan Timandasya Ganajana Shalakaya Chakshurumalitam Hina Tasmai Shri Gurave. I'm going to read the next verse in purport because it's the last one and it's very short. Text 25. O Sutta Goswami, your words are pleasing to our minds. Please therefore explain to us, as it was spoken by the great devotee Shukadeva Goswami, who is very expert in transcendental knowledge, and who spoke to Maharaj Parikshit upon being asked. Knowledge explained by the previous acharya like Shukadeva Goswami and followed by the next like Sutta Goswami is always powerful transcendental knowledge, and it is therefore penetrating and useful to all submissive students. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the second canto, third chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Pure Devotional Service, the Change in Heart. So text 24 repeated is, certainly that heart is steel frame, which in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration does not change when ecstasy takes place, tears fill the eyes and the hairs stand on end. So how many of us are there? Steel-hearted. Yeah, it's a nice wake-up call. Like, okay, I'm not, when I chant, I don't, when I chant with concentration, I ecstasy doesn't happen, tears don't flow from my eyes, hairs don't stand on end. So, of course, we know that if we're following the process of devotional service, our heart is becoming purified and softer, but one can still perceive that the heart is still framed. There's so much contamination in the heart that has to be cleared out. And this is through the process of anartha-nivritti. We do that. We clear the heart of all these upadis, material designations, and these various material desires. They start to become cleansed away in that process, and then one reaches the stage of steadiness. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that the chanting of the holy name with offense is basically keeping one on the lower stages of devotional service. So it's recommended that we have to somehow or other get to this clearing stage of chanting, which means that we have to understand the 10 offenses. We have to try to avoid them as much as we can while we're chanting and also in our daily lives. And then we can be fully attentive. And I believe it was Harij Chintamani where Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that the root of all the offenses, the root of creating all the other offenses is basically inattention. So if one is focused and attentive on chanting the holy name, then you start to realize how these other offenses are affecting your concentration. And then you try to adjust your consciousness, your life, so that you don't create those offenses. So it's all within that. It's all within your attention to chanting the holy name, performing devotional service, concentration. Right? That's the whole process of yoga, is that we're actually trying to channel all of our concentration and focus upon the lotus feet of the Lord. And in order to be in that full concentration, there's so many things you have to avoid: offenses, aparadhas, offenses, material desires, etc., like that. And then Krishna gives you the intelligence. Oh yeah, you're trying to concentrate, be focused, and then some memory comes in from what you did what you said to a devotee. You're like, oh wow, yeah, I probably shouldn't have been angry with him or her. Let me apologize. Like that. Krishna gives you intelligence. Tesham satata yujanam bhajatam pratipurvakam dadami buddhi yogantam enamam upayanti te. So if you have that desire that you want to be close to Krishna, you want Krishna, Krishna gives you that intelligence to do it. So today most likely we'll hear about the 10 offenses, and we'll hear about how to avoid them, why to avoid them, etc. Most likely for the initiation. So we won't get so much into that. We can be sure that if we're following the process, we're trying to be as sincere as we can, which looks different for different people. But if we're trying to be as sincere as we can to practice devotional service, then gradually, our heart will become more and more soft. And we'll be able to experience these things that the Bhagavatam and the Nectar Devotion talks about. We'll be able to experience, tears filling the eyes and hair standing on end, etc. in time. Or some may think like, oh, it's so mystical, but it's actually like our natural state to do that, right? Are there any comments or questions? Yes, Magadari?
So it says here, well, you mentioned that if we're trying to be as sincere as we can, or if we want Krishna, then he will help us. But when I look at myself, I don't see intensity of desire for Krishna consciousness, for serving Krishna, for loving Krishna. I don't see that in myself. So what hope do I have?
Well, that's the whole purpose of following the process, is that neophytes don't have intense desire to serve the Lord. If they did, then they wouldn't be neophytes. So that's why we follow Vaidhi Bhakti. There's practices, there's regulated devotional service, there's a whole lifestyle of applying Krishna consciousness so that you develop those desires. I mean, how much can you desire Krishna if your mind is so disturbed by the sense objects, right? Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam priya bharta chesasam vyavasyatmika bhur samarana vidyate. So if the mind is still so attracted to the various sense objects, the forms of this world, the sounds, the textures of this world, etc., separate from Krishna, then that means that they can't have this resolute determination for devotional service. So as neophytes, we have attraction, still have intense attraction to material energy, but we want to have attraction for Krishna, so therefore we follow this process of Vaidhi Bhakti, and we gradually cleanse the heart, and gradually, as you cleanse the heart, then your desire for Krishna increases. Your desire to chant increases, your desire to hear about Krishna increases, etc. Of course, there's a certain methodology that you have to follow to actually follow properly, in the sense of really making great leaps of advancement versus just watering weeds also along with our devotional creeper. So that's the point, is the intense desires for Krishna will develop. So I believe it was Srila Rupa Goswami who explains that even if we don't have a desire for Krishna, we can still pray to Krishna that I want to serve you, and I want to be able to have an intense desire for serving. I mean, simply that introspection is in one sense and is an indirect like sign that you have a desire to want Krishna. Otherwise, you wouldn't be thinking like that. There's millions of people in the world that maybe have no desire to serve God. Some of them may have heard about serving Krishna, but they're not thinking, oh, I don't have a desire to serve Krishna. Why is this? I want to, etc. So there is a desire there. But yes, in neophyte stages, it is not so intense because we have so much attraction to other things. So yeah, as we clear away the anarthas, then these desire strengthens. So, and even we can have very strong intelligence, which is helpful for advancing. We can have very strong intelligence that keeps us watering the devotional creeper and trying to avoid as much as possible the weeds that can be grown. So intelligence helps, but intelligence isn't everything. Intelligence helps us get to that point where we experience, or where our heart is desirous of Krishna. It's intensely desiring. But with the use of our intelligence, we can understand how to apply Vaidhi Bhakti to our lives and how to avoid various pitfalls. And of course, we get that intelligence by Guru Sadhu Shastra. And I think Prabhupada summed up this whole thing with complete progressive march on the path, on the return path home back to God. It will depend on the instructions of the revealed scriptures directed by a realized devotee. So Guru Sadhu Shastra, checking in with them, allow us to be able to understand how to apply the principles of Krishna consciousness according to time, place, and circumstance. Any other comments or questions?
Can I do one?
Yes, Krishnendu. Comment.
I like something you said about avoiding the 10 offenses, which isn't just when we're chanting. It's also in our day-to-day activities. It's not also just japa. It's also when there's kirtan going on. Different things to be aware of. But, I've heard more advanced devotees who have more of a taste for chanting describe how chanting our japa, it's not limited, it's not remote to the japa period. It starts the day before. What are we doing? Are we going to rest in a timely manner? Are we actually preparing ourselves so we can wake up early, preferably chant a few rounds or more before Mangalarti? Go to Mangalarti, don't space out, be focused, be attentive, then chant japa and, put your attention and your focus, and our day-to-day lives will affect that. If we're studying or at least getting absorbed in the pastimes or philosophy, then it becomes that much easier when we're chanting, because your mind can wander, but it's very quickly to see that and make the distinction and bring it back. But if we're reading or hearing and we're not really absorbing it or taking it in and kind of just floating through the day, and kind of looking back, like, where did the time go? What was I doing? Then japa becomes difficult. And japa becomes difficult, then in my experience, everything else becomes difficult. Especially if you don't get in a nice routine and manner to, be focused and attentive and get it done earlier in the day, then the tendency is, we chant later in the day, which makes it more difficult. Then everything gets backed up, and then sometimes we stay up late and then we can't go to sleep early, and then it becomes a whole thing. We really have to put our foot down and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this a priority. So we really have to prioritize this to make advancement. And Krishna's not cheap.
Thank you, Krishnendu. Yes, Margaret.
Rishi Prabhu, would you like to communicate with us?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to, if it's still comment time and question time, I just wanted to make a short comment about the tears in the eyes in the purport, and also in regard to what we hear every morning. It's just a letter from Prabhupada, so here's the letter. My dear Shama Sundar, please accept my blessings. I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated 3rd March 1970, along with the Govindam record. The record is so nice that I am playing it at least once in a day, and it is giving me transcendental pleasure with tears in my eyes. I am sure this record will be the first-class hit, as opined by the experts. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share that.
Okay. Okay, so we have initiation today. We'll start 10:30 kirtan, and then Maharaj will come around 11 to start the actual yajna. And we have, I forgot to send out the schedule last night, so this morning I sent it out. So you can take a look at it. And yeah, it's going to be a great day. Haribol. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.